Begin. My name is Blair Ruble, and I'm Vice President for Programs here at the Wilson Center. And I'm speaking on behalf of Jane Harmon, our president, who is overseas, and somebody I think many people in this room know, Andrew Seeley, our executive vice president. If you don't know, Andrew is adjusting to the addition of twins to his family earlier this week. So he really, I think everybody in this room knows that Andrew has a special love of Mexico, but I think the arrival of the twins made it impossible for him to be here at this moment, even though he had planned to. So I've been asked to welcome the senator, and I'm very pleased to do so, and I will introduce the senator in a moment. But I want to take this opportunity to say how proud we at the Wilson Center are of the Mexico Institute. I think everybody in this room understands why. The program is excellent. Duncan, Chris, their team are spectacular. My staff sits among the staff of the Mexico Institute, and they're just a delight. And I just wanted to acknowledge all of their hard work and to say how proud we at the center are and how wonderful it is. And I see many of the folks in the Mexico Institute lined up. And I think that this meeting really reflects a lot of the strengths of what they have pulled together. So I wanted to thank them. Senator Jeff Flake is a fifth-generation Arizonan who was raised on a cattle ranch in Snowflake, Arizona. That's a great introduction for a senator right there. We should want all of our senators to be from places like Snowflake. Prior to his election in the U.S. Senate, he served in the U.S. House of Representatives from 2001 to 2013, representing the East Valley. As a member of the U.S. Senate, Jeff sits on the Judiciary Committee, the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and the Foreign Relations Committee, where he's also chair of the Subcommittee on African Affairs. And there must be a story from Snowflake to Africa, and indeed he served on a Mormon mission in Southern Africa and then went on to graduate from Brigham Young, where he received his bachelor's in international relations and his master's in political science. Senator Flake is important for this discussion because he's been a champion of strong U.S.-Mexico relations. He's been a strong and active supporter of Ambassador Roberta Jacobson's confirmation. He was one of the key voices in the Senate, reminding his colleagues of how important the U.S. relationship with Mexico is, how it's too important a relationship not to have a well-qualified ambassador. He's been an advocate for the effective management of the Arizona-Mexico border and an advocate for the Arizona border communities. And this is a subject which I know you know is also close to the center of the Wilson Center's work. So again, we're very proud and pleased to have him here. He has provided additional staffing at Arizona's border crossings. He's worked with the Treasury Department to ensure that anti-money laundering efforts do not lead to bank closures and the decline in cross-border commerce. And he's recognized the importance of cross-border trade for Arizona and is an advocate of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. As you can tell from this introduction, he's a man of what one would expect of a senator, of great accomplishment, and he clearly is also somebody who is very rooted in and committed to the people and the place he represents. So I would like to welcome Senator Flake to the center.
Well, thank you so much. I'm usually just referred to and introduced as the other senator from Arizona, McCain and that other guy, Flake. But as mentioned, I did grow up in a town called Snowflake, Arizona. It actually does snow there. It's up in the northern region, up on a plateau. But the name comes from my great-great-grandfather, William Jordan Flake, and Erastus Snow, who settled the place. And so I grew up there. not knowing that flake was a pejorative term. Nobody made fun of us in Snowflake. It's quite a sheltered childhood. But I have 10 brothers and sisters. I have 69 first cousins on my father's side alone. That's how I won my election. But, so, when people say that Congress's popularity is down to paid staff and blood relatives, I say I'm going to ride that popularity wave as long as I can. So, but it is good to be here. Soon after arriving in the Senate, right after arriving in the Senate, I was approached by Chuck Schumer and a few others asking if I would join a gang, and I said no. I left gang life behind after the mean streets of Snowflake, but they mentioned this gang, which ultimately became the Gang of Eight, to push for comprehensive immigration reform. And I am proud of what we accomplished there. I'm proud of the bill that we passed out of the Senate. Obviously, if Republicans were in the majority, it would have looked maybe a little different. But it was a bill that passed the Senate, and I wish it would have passed the House. We're going to continue to need comprehensive, meaningful immigration reform. I'll move it comprehensively. I'll move it piecemeal. We just need meaningful immigration reform, and so we'll continue to work on that. But today I'll talk about a few issues, some of which were raised in the introduction. And I do appreciate this opportunity and appreciate the good work that the Wilson Center does. I had the privilege of serving with Jane Harmon for a number of years in the House, traveled many times with her overseas, and I'm pleased with the work that she's done and that the Wilson Center has always done on issues like these. Obviously, the U.S.-Mexico relationship is important to everyone in the U.S., but no more so than to folks living in Arizona. Mexico is Arizona's largest trading partner by far. It's been wonderful to see Mexico grow and develop economically. Mexico now claims the 20th largest economy in the world. I think that's a surprise to most of my colleagues and others that they're growing like that. But the close proximity, obviously, points to tremendous potential for our relationship to grow and develop. More than $1 billion in goods are exchanged between our two countries every single day. Arizona, there are about $17 billion worth of goods exchanged between Arizona and Mexico just last year. While these economic ties are important, other relationships are just as important. Transportation issues, environmental issues, natural resource management, security threats. These are just some of the issues that we deal with Mexico on a daily basis on. The benefits of a working partnership with the U.S. and our southern neighbor were the driving force behind my efforts to have Roberta Jacobson approved finally as ambassador to Mexico. As mentioned, that top diplomatic post was vacant for 9 months. That's inexcusable to have a post that important. I appreciate the good work of the Hispanic Chamber in that area and the bipartisan coalition of my colleagues that came together to finally secure that nomination on April 28th. I happen to know Roberta Jacobson from some of her earlier work, particularly with regard to Cuba. She was the chief negotiator in our new diplomatic relations and the negotiations that led to that. She did a fabulous job there. And I've always felt, as many of you know, I've for 15 years now pushing to get rid of the travel ban on Cuba and to get rid of the embargo. I've always thought if you want to punish the Castro brothers, make them deal with spring break once or twice. You know, that's just let people go. Let people go. Along those lines, I've been down about 15 times to Cuba. My wife 7 or 8 times, but we took our 2 youngest children who hadn't been yet just down 2 weeks ago. We were able to travel under a people-to-people license. We stayed at private bed and breakfast, hired a private taxi to take us around, ate in private restaurants. frequented private sector activities and stores and others, and I encourage every American to do the same, to come. It's good for the Cuban people. It's certainly good for Americans as well. But there are frustrating challenges with regard to our situation on the border with Mexico, one of which is to get significant or sufficient staffing for the ports. We've made significant investment in infrastructure in our ports, but we've been unable to adequately staff them. As we know, in 2014, the Homeland Security Appropriations Bill contained authorization for the department to hire 2,000 new CPB officers by the end of fiscal year 2015. 2 years later, less than half of those have been hired. This is in part due to just delays in the hiring process, difficulty finding individuals willing to do that type of work, and in some of these remote locations. There's also high attrition rates that add to the hiring backlog. So last night I convened a stakeholder meeting that included Arizona's port authorities and cross-border interests to hear directly from the human resource representatives at DHS, trying to figure out what's the biggest problem, how can we move ahead. I was pleased to learn that CPB has taken steps to increase recruitment, to streamline the process. It's clear, however, that they have a long way to go. According to CPB, if you can believe this, to hire one frontline officer, they have to go through, or there are 100 applications submitted, 100 to get one in the end. At that rate, it means, and combined with the high attrition rates, CPB would have to review nearly 100,000 new applications in order to meet its hiring goals for 2016. Obviously, some things need to change, and we're going to have some adjustments in recruitment and how we deal with that. To that end, last year I introduced the Border Jobs for Veterans Act, myself and Senator McCain, Congresswoman McSally in the House. That act finally requires, and it shouldn't take an act of Congress to get our service, our military and DHS to actually communicate and work together to place veterans who are returning from overseas assignments in some of these positions that could expedite the filling of some of these positions. That has passed now. In my discussions with DHS, I'm pleased to hear that they're saying it is moving the needle. We need to move the needle a lot further, but it is starting to move the needle, so I'm pleased that that is happening. Also, I want to touch on briefly the de-risking that banks are undertaking along the border region. It was mentioned that this de-risking in response to efforts to combat illegal money laundering and trafficking. We certainly support those efforts. However, the response of some of the banks have left a lot of people wanting to conduct legal commerce in a bad way. And so we've written a number of letters, convened meetings. We're trying to identify the problem and to make sure that we can move ahead and have adequate representation facilities for the economic conditions that exist. In addition, we've got to ensure that we have the right policies in place with regard to trade in general. One thing that has been extremely disconcerting in this presidential campaign is that the top candidates, the top two on each side, have made statements that are hardly free trade friendly, let's put it kindly. I wish that we could have a situation where we could simply enter into bilateral free trade agreements with every country. That's not the world we live in. Sometimes you have to enter into multilateral trade agreements that are complex, complicated, and that's the only way sometimes to have the level of free trade that we need for this country. If you look at our situation moving ahead, we in the United States are 3% of the world's population, 3%. We represent only 20% of the world's economic output, and a shrinking number at that as the world grows. how in the world we expect to grow economically and to compete in a global marketplace if we shut down our borders and we build Fortress America and shun these free trade agreements. I don't know, but we cannot simply turn a blind eye to globalization and figure that we'll be fine on our own. And I'm pleased to be working with a number of my colleagues to try to reverse the perception, and certainly as it pertains to Mexico and our border issues there, to work with like-minded colleagues who, one, will tout the benefits of our trade relationships and the importance of having the infrastructure and the staffing that we need at the border, as well as the environment economically with a banking system that works for those who want to participate in this cross-border activity. But I appreciate those in this room who are working to bring that about and are helping us in Congress to understand what our priorities ought to be in that regard. Thank you for having me here, and be happy to answer a couple of questions.
Yes, Senator Flake has offered to answer a couple of questions, so let's take one right there.
As long as they're not about Donald Trump.
They're not. They're not.
I get those as soon as I get back to the Capitol.
I'll be asking them. Rafael Bernal from The Hill. Congressman O'Rourke earlier said that talking about, correct me if I misquote him, something about securing the border is just the wrong conversation. That we need to be talking about infrastructure and moving goods across the border. And he even said that the way the president talks about the border is a bit too conservative, might be the word, or a bit too restrictive is a better word. Mm-hmm. What do you make of that statement?
Well, we are endlessly, myself and Senator McCain and others from Arizona, trying to shift the focus in terms of all. If you're not in Arizona or Texas, if you're not in a border state, then you think that the border just consists of restrictive activity, as we talked about, and all we need are green uniforms down there to make sure that we have the right security situation. Obviously, that's important, and we've made significant gains in that respect. But it is an endless struggle to get our colleagues to recognize the needs that exist in terms of commerce. They are amazed, my colleagues, when we take them to the border at the amount of activity that goes on, that these ports are busy, and the amount of goods that go back and forth every day. And to facilitate that is important. We know the trends with regard to migration. There'll be net out migration in terms of Mexico, or net migration south in terms of Mexico, not necessarily some of the other Central American countries. But that just isn't recognized around the country, so that's why it's important that we talk about it. Also, the gains that Mexico has made economically, 20th largest economy in the world. That's not appreciated as it should be. And also the cooperation that we have with Mexico in terms of the issues that I talked about, natural resource management, security, drug issues. People don't understand that we do have a lot of cooperation that goes on, and that's why it's important to have our top diplomat there. So we're continually working on that, and we struggle with both those in our party, many of whom just want to talk about walls or things like that, and as well as the other party. We've got to make a bipartisan effort to make sure that we have our priorities straight. Obviously, that includes security, but we need to talk more about commerce.
Thanks. Maybe time for one more question?
You bet.
Yeah, great. Yes.
Thank you, Senator. Roger Libby with DHL, and we've worked closely with you in the past and appreciate your comments today. Especially appreciate your comments on trade. And it's been frustrating for us seeing the value of small businesses on both sides of the border working together to build products. How do we get that message of the positive side of trade to your fellow senators, to the members of the House, in a way that can start to make it tangible for them so that they can see that trade is not a negative, right. Trade is part of the way that America grows going forward? And how can we help you sort of change the unfortunate trend we've seen on trade topics?
Right. Well, obviously during a presidential campaign, during any election year, whether there's an off year, presidential or not, it is difficult for politicians to identify the beneficiaries of trade. It's far easier to identify those who have lost out. A community that has lost a factory, those who have lost jobs. Those you can identify, those are more tangible than the overall benefits. Cheaper goods, certainly more exports. We all know we have a better quality of life because of trade, and our economy grows because of trade. But you're right, it's during an election campaign in particular. 30-second sound bites are not very amenable to having a proper discussion about the benefits of trade. And so I think if you can't expect the candidates to do it on the campaign trail, I think other organizations need to redouble their efforts during an election year. And then maybe when you get to a lame duck, you know, you can make some progress on some of these things. But I wouldn't expect much more out of politicians during an election year, particularly those who are in cycle. The best thing about the Senate, obviously, is a 6-year term, and some of us can talk about it during an election cycle who aren't up right now. And some of us even tried during our election cycle to talk about it. But not many will, and so other organizations really need to step up. I know that chambers of commerce, both nationally and those certainly in Arizona and elsewhere, have done a good job, but other organizations need to talk about it as well. And challenge politicians when they talk about this. Challenge them with the numbers. How are we going to grow economically? How are we going to have 2, 3, 4% economic growth if we wall ourselves off? Where has that ever succeeded around the world? So I would challenge you to redouble your efforts, and we'll try to do what we can on Capitol Hill.
Thank you so much, Senator
Thank you.
Flake. Let me just let Russ Jones from the chair of the Border Trade Alliance, also join me in thanking the senator.
Yes, thank you very much, Senator. We really appreciate your leadership in getting this her nomination confirmed in the Senate, and we agree that 9 months is about 9 months too long to do this kind of a confirmation with such an important trade partner. Well, thank you again for your leadership.
Thanks, Russ. Thank you all.
We're going to move straight into our next session. Commissioner Kurlikowski is here, so we're going to actually just invite him to come to the stage, and Michael Comunez will help run that session.